Could tell you that, considering speaking to sources, officials, and hearing from Michel Barnier, the lead negotiator for the European Union, and a plethora of EU ministers yesterday, patience is very much wearing thin. In fact, Jean-Claude Juncker's spokesperson said that this morning. He also said that next week we could probably see an emergency summit because the likelihood that this week won't see an end to this Brexit crisis. He said it's unlikely that EU leaders will agree on an extension because views are very diverse. Essentially, there's quite a lot of frustration in Brussels by the, I suppose, behaviour of the British government, the House of Commons. I mean, remember, this is supposed to be Britain's last EU summit as a member state of the European Union. That's what it's billed for. Essentially, what should have happened is that the withdrawal agreement, the terms and conditions of which the UK leaves the European Union, that should have been signed off months ago. Both sides should be well underway in having a conversation about a future trade relationship, and yet the impasse remains. In fact, it's actually quite worse. And also, what we've heard this morning is that the UK will request a 3-month extension. That hasn't actually been communicated to Brussels yet. I mean, Jean-Claude Juncker said this morning he still hasn't received a letter from Theresa May. So again, that kind of adds to the frustration that the communication between the UK and the EU is in short supply. And then, once that request comes in, they have a lot of things to consider, like the implications for if they give them a 3-month delay and then the UK doesn't participate in the EU elections, yet needs a further extension because once again it hasn't been able to build consensus, where will that leave things? So there's a lot of things to consider, and as Jean-Claude Juncker said this morning, patience is wearing very thin.
And are we seeing any crack in the unity that we've seen from the 27 nations thus far? Any countries coming out and saying anything different?
Not quite. Essentially, what they're all saying is that we want a decision from Britain, and there hasn't been any concrete plan from the UK yet. And some sides are saying, actually, look, I think maybe we should just cut our losses and let the UK leave without a deal and deal with that situation. Others are concerned about the fact that if they get a long extension and then they do hold elections, what type of MEPs will they send to the European Parliament? Other member states are concerned about the fact that the EU has been prioritising Brexit for so long now that other issues threatening the future of the European project, other existential issues like Russian interference, the migrant crisis, recalcitrant Eurosceptic governments, those issues are not being taken seriously or are rated second when they should be prioritised by the European Union. So there is a diverse amount of opinions, but I wouldn't necessarily say, Belle, that the unity has shaken yet. I think that ultimately, when the UK does give an outline as to what kind of extension it wants and for what reason, they will actually deliver it, not because they want to. It will be very much through gritted teeth, but that will be done for pragmatic reasons because nobody wants a no-deal scenario. It would be catastrophic for the UK, but it would be seen as very catastrophic for the EU member states, the ones that trade with the UK, but also countries like Ireland. I'm standing in front of the Irish Permanent Representation Office now, the impact on the Good Friday Agreement. And remember, the other thing is, even if the UK does crash out with a deal, that doesn't mean these issues go away. I mean, the renegotiation still has to happen. They still have to talk about trade. They still have to talk about visas, citizen rights. They still have to talk about the £39 billion pound or euro divorce settlement. So everybody knows that a crashing out will just make the situation more acrimonious. It won't solve anything.
Well, thank you very much. Shona Murray there in Brussels. Let's put some of that to Vincent McAviney, who's in Westminster this morning. Vinny, as we've been talking about earlier in the programme, there is this split down the UK cabinet. How far do you think it's going to go? Are we going to end up seeing a shake-up, a different cabinet at the end of this process?
Good morning, Belle. Well, just to bring you the latest here, we've had updated lines from Downing Street this morning, with an official being quoted as saying that Theresa May is only going to write asking for a short extension. So we think that means until June the 30th to avoid going into those EU parliamentary elections. And he's quoted as saying there is a case for giving Parliament a bit more time to agree a way forward. But the people of this country have been waiting nearly 3 years now. They are fed up with Parliament's failure to take a decision, and the Prime Minister shares their frustration. And in the last few moments, the Education Secretary, Damien Hines, has been on the radio here saying that it'll only be a short extension that is requested and a longer one is not what people want to see. So it seems like this battle that played out yesterday in the cabinet over this letter has ended up with the Prime Minister only being able to request a short extension. If we look through some of this morning's papers, they have details on it. If we start with the Mail, they talk about how 1,000 days have been wasted because it's only 1,000 days. It's 1,000 days now since the UK took this decision, only 9 days until we go, and we are still in this position of not being clear on what we're doing. And then if we go to the Telegraph, we get to see some of the details. So there's a picture there of Andrea Leadsom, who is the leader of the House of Commons. She is a strong Brexiteer and got very angry yesterday in the cabinet, saying this used to be a cabinet that would deliver Brexit, now it's not. She has branded it a Remainer cabinet. That's also on the front of the Express this morning, saying you don't want to deliver Brexit. I think after the Prime Minister last week criticised the cabinet for too many leaks, this is once again going to enrage her. But really, there isn't much she can do because she can't really sack someone and replace them because her position is so weak. But we might see resignations. And I think Andrea Leadsom at the moment seems like the favourite on this if there would have been a long extension. And then on the front of the Mirror this morning, May begs for Brextra time. Well, it seems that the threat of possible resignations from the Brexiteer side, the ERG, those hardcore Brexiteer MPs, still not falling in line with the Prime Minister, mean that she has just curtailed what she wanted. There was talk of needing up to maybe a year or so in time to play for, but the Prime Minister seems to be writing a much shorter letter, and we're going to hear from her later on today at Prime Minister's Questions, her weekly bout with Jeremy Corbyn in the House of Commons. But I think the more fiery questions will come from her own backbenchers, and there's the demand as well that she goes to the 1922 committee, which is the controlling committee of the Conservative Party, later on tonight to explain her plans. And at the moment, though, it seems like things are getting more and more difficult for the Prime Minister, and there's lots of talk about how Operation Yellowhammer, that is the contingency planning for the UK crashing out of the EU next Friday, having a hard Brexit. That plan would see command and control structures being put in by the government to try and make sure that the economy is secured, because there are some pretty dire predictions of what would happen if the UK does leave without a deal.